One of the strangest looking yet groundbreaking German aircraft developed during World War II was the Messerschmitt Me163 Komet. It was a rocket-powered fighter, and the only one ever developed throughout history, and it was the first plane piloted that could exceed a speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour. The Komet was considered a German wonder weapon, and Hitler believed it would help change the course of the war for the Nazis. But the Komet was extensively tested, and during this many pilots were killed because of the dangerous use of the rocket propellant. They did get involved in the conflict and did score a number of confirmed kills, but the Allies began to realise that the short duration of the Komet's flight could be counteracted, and the Allies began to attack airfields where Komets were operating from. Operationally, the Komet was a failure, and despite the fact that the aircraft shot down 16 enemy planes, targeting bombers mostly, it was incredibly expensive, and the aircraft had also taken the lives of many skilled German Luftwaffe pilots. But how did this plane melt one of the pilots who would sit in the cockpit? Welcome to the Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Messerschmitt Me163 Komet did set an unofficial speed record in October 1941, and in its appearance, it seems, in my opinion, like a chunky, fast-flying sparrow. If you ever see a Komet, you look at it and it's rather very small compared to other planes of the time. The pilots of the plane regularly tried to max out the aircraft, and the first prototype was known as the Me163A, and 10 of these planes were built for pilot training and were unarmed. However, during the testing of the A series, the undercarriage became an issue, and as the plane took off, the large springs rebounded and they often struck the aircraft. When the plane also managed to land, it had to be fetched by a small tractor-style vehicle that could attach itself to the front of the aircraft, as it could not move much on the ground. The Komet would in the air become rather unstable when it did approach max speed, as was expected, and the rocket fuel on board the plane lasted around 8 minutes after takeoff. This meant that the plane could be in the air for 8 minutes only, and following the rocket fuel running down, the pilot had to then try their best to glide the plane back to Earth as best as they could. In the 8 minutes in the sky, the plane was faster than anything the Allies had, and it could be thrown around like nothing which had been seen in the skies before. It could climb incredibly quickly, and because of this the pilots even had to be weaned onto a special diet. The Komet pilots had to ensure they did not have a build-up of gas in their intestines, and they had to only eat small amounts of fibre because of this, as there was a great fear that the extreme climbs and G-forces, coupled with the unpressurised cabin, could cause intense problems and severe stomach issues for the pilots. Some of the men in the cockpit also got very sick because of the conditions, and the very quick rapid decrease in pressure in the plane. Because of the light and small design of the Komet, the aircraft could not hold landing gear, and during the landing, there are often many problems. If landing not on an airfield, the Komet had a habit to flip, and a number of test pilots suffered severe fractures to their face and also spines when the aircraft would spin and dive towards the ground. But there was a further problem, and this was that the test pilots realised that the fuel of the Komet was actually incredibly corrosive and it could explode. If the rocket fuel touched the skin, it could dissolve it. The pilot was also sat very close to the fuel tanks, and if there was an issue with the fuel, the pilot was a sitting duck who would suffer incredibly harrowing injuries and death. The Komet for this has been regarded by many as a plane that could melt or dissolve a pilot because of its fuel. Specifically, the rocket motor utilised 2 different substances. One, known as T-stoff, was up to 90% hydrogen peroxide, and C-stoff was a mixture of methanol, calcium, permanganate, water and hydrazine. When these were mixed together, they were incredibly volatile and explosive, and they would push the flame out of the back of the plane, and this is how the incredible high speeds were achieved. But the pilots were forced to wear asbestos suits to help protect them, but there were accounts when this did not work. The Komet, let's remember, was a prototype plane during World War II, and was something that the world had never seen before. Because of this, things did often go very wrong, but when they did, it was catastrophic. During test flights, this was often noted. If there were problems with the fuel line or if the fuel tank got damaged, then the aircraft would usually explode into a huge fireball. Pilots would hope that if this occurred, that the plane would then instantly explode to bring about the instant quick death for them. They knew how dangerous this aircraft was, but there was one Luftwaffe pilot who experienced a horrifying death behind a Komet. Josef Pöhs had during World War II been awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and he had been awarded this for his bravery. He was part of the Jagdgeschwader 54 fighter wing, and he then transferred to the test unit for the Komet. However, on the 30th of December 1943, Pöhs was killed on board the plane, which was damaged on takeoff. As his aircraft was ready to go, the drop-away undercarriage bounced off the ground and it hit the fuel line of the plane containing the T-Stoff. This led to complete engine failure, and Pöhs tried his best to glide the plane safely back, but he could not do this. His Komet crashed into the town of Bad Wischenal, and he succumbed to his injuries, but they were incredibly horrific. He had survived the initial landing, but had died due to the exposure to the T-Stoff fuel. One eyewitness to the accident claimed, when they finally reached him and turned the Komet over, they were greeted with a gruesome sight. T-Stoff leaking from the ruptured line had dissolved the unconscious Pöhs alive. Another eyewitness claimed that the pilot's right arm had dissolved to nothing. The other arm, as well as the head, were little more than soft jelly. What had happened was the fuel had corroded and melted the flesh of the pilot, and the ground crew at the time stated that Pöhs had been dissolved and that there was a pink slime found in the cockpit, presumably Pöhs' remains, and there was very little left of him. Let's remember that Josef Pöhs, this pilot, was not an inexperienced nobody. He was a skilled fighter ace who had been awarded the highest military honours, and he had a total number of 43 air victories. But the Komet was a different plane and a different beast, and a dangerous one for those who sat behind the cockpit. At the end of the Second World War, the German nation was suffering heavily with many fuel shortages, and very few Komets were pushed into the sky because of this. But there were some that did fight against the Allies, and they tended to go after bombing aircraft in the region where they were based because of the limited range and fuel. In July 1944, an Me163 Komet tried to get involved in shooting down American bombing planes which were raiding Mersburg, but it was then chased by a US pilot in a Lockheed P-38 Lightning. In October 1944, a Komet was shot down by P-51 Mustangs, but the pilot managed to parachute out of the plane to safety. In November 1944, there was also a group of 12 Komet fighters belonging to the Jagdgeschwader 400 fighter group, and they intercepted bombers near to the city of Leipzig. But the Germans managed to take out 2 bombers, and the guns of the Komet required the pilot to be very accurate. But the escort American fighters did manage to shoot down 4 Komets, with the plane being piloted by Jakob Bonhoraff, becoming the final one shot down specifically by an American P-51. Further attacks using the Komet did take place in the final year of the war, but they were heavily limited by the fuel shortages. There were also a number of ground crew who had been working for the Luftwaffe who were killed due to the problems and accidents because of the Komet, but it was in a sense a plane too ahead of its time, and now jet fighters are a staple of the military all around the world. But the Komet itself could be a plane that was very deadly for the pilots, and they knew specifically how dangerous it was when they climbed into the cockpit. They knew that if something went wrong, then they wanted the plane to burst immediately into flames, bringing about quick and instant death, rather than the fate that Josef Pöhs suffered, being melted into the cockpit by the fuel. The Komet operationally was a complete failure, and despite shooting down 16 enemy aircraft, it cost the lives of a lot of pilots, but also utilised a huge amount of funds for the Reich. The money could have been spent in many better ways by the Nazis, but Hitler dreamed of this plane being a wonder weapon that could very much have changed the Second World War. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.